Tonight we're going to be dealing with Chinese Buddhism. And just start, most of you have had some background in Buddhism, but I'll just give a little bit of an introduction in case there's someone here who doesn't have any of that knowledge. It originated in the 6th century BCE in what is today Nepal. Is based on the teachings of one Siddhartha Gautama. That was his name. Buddha wasn't his name. The Buddha is a title, just like Christ is a title. So it was based on the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, who, according to tradition, grew up in luxury and contentment. He was a prince. Now, a lot of this is mythological, but like I said, the myths are just as important in understanding what people believe as to what might actually been the case. You know, scholars will always go in and try and undermine these things, and that's part of their role. But understanding the mythological stories is significantly important. So he grew up as a prince, luxury, contentment. His father was told by the Brahmin when his mother had a dream that he would either be a great prince and ruler or a great teacher, which meant religious teacher. His father was the king. Which choice do you think the king wanted? He wanted to be a prince so he could be a king. So he protects him, according to the story. He lets him grow up in luxury, doesn't let him see any problems, etc., etc. But then one day he goes out with his chariot driver and sees 3 visions, on 3 separate occasions. He sees old age, he sees disease, and he sees death. And in each case, he asks his chariot driver, well, what's that? Because he's never seen that. And, and his chariot driver tells him, this happens to everyone. So he decides that he has to find out answers, and he leaves his princely life and goes wandering as an ascetic. An ascetic is someone who gives up the world. If you've ever seen pictures of Indian sadhus with ashes on them, and that's the ascetic. Like, can someone put this on me?
You don't want me to. You don't want to. Joy doesn't want to try.
Sorry for the introduction. That's okay. Thank you. So in any case, he goes wandering. He practices all these ascetic practices. And then he sits down in a place called Bodh Gaya under a tree, which is called the Bodhi tree now. And that's where he receives his enlightenment. And that enlightenment essentially said that the middle path was the best way to live. Hedonism with all the luxury and joy, that produces suffering. But asceticism, on the other hand, with its torturing the body, does much the same thing. Try and find the middle path of moderation based on meditation, understanding the nature of who you really are, and then following a certain ethical path. So then he left Gaya, and he went to a place just north of Varanasi called Sarnath, and he gave his first sermon. And it was to his 5 companions. And it's called the Sermon of the Spinning of the Wheel of the Law. So it's a very important sermon for Buddhists. It would be equivalent to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where he lets his disciples know the insights that he has seen. Like I said, it's a path of moderation, away from extremes of self-indulgence and self-mortification, and he becomes what is called the perfectly awakened one. The Buddha, what Buddha means is the one who is awake. It's often translated as the enlightened one, but technically it means the one who was woken up to reality. He's not fooled by what most people think reality is. So they formed the first community of monks, and then for the rest of his life he traveled what is called the Gangetic Plain in northern India, teaching, gathering more disciples. And his basic teaching was Life lived at one level, which is called the level of samsara, of desire, is a life of suffering. Desire will always, in the end, produce suffering. Because desire wants permanence. It wants to control things. But the nature of reality is impermanent. So you're caught. You want things to be perfect, a certain way, and fill all your desires, but that's not going to happen. So what a lot of people do is they get into states of denial. They don't look at the truth. They deny things. They say that even if they fail, they'll deny it. Often leads to addiction as a basic form of denial. In any case, this is his basic teaching. Okay, so Buddhist texts are known as the Tripitaka, means the three bundles. As in most religions, the original Buddhist teachings were oral. For hundreds of years, they were memorized. There was nothing written down. And finally, they were written down as what is known as the Tripitaka. And that became an important event in the history of the religion because now you have texts which you can refer to. You don't have to rely on memory necessarily. It also creates problems, which a lot of people don't think about. When you have a text, it has to be interpreted. If I am a teacher and I am just teaching my thoughts to you, I can give them to you straight on. But if I write them down and die, and you want to know what I thought, all you have is the text, but you don't have me. Someone, therefore, has to interpret those texts. And this happens in every religious tradition. You get those who are considered official interpreters, those who understand the meaning of the text. And this happens in Buddhism as well. Okay. A key element in the spread of Buddhism was this emperor by the name of Ashoka, 3rd century BCE. Buddha lived 6th century, so 3 centuries later, an emperor becomes a Buddhist. Somewhat similar in the West to an emperor becoming a Christian. And Constantine became a Christian. Although the stories of Ashoka are much nicer than the stories of Constantine. The story about Ashoka was he had just led a major battle. Thousands of people killed. And he's come to the battlefield and he sees all the dying and the wounded. And then he sees a Buddhist monk walking by. And suddenly he has an insight that what he has done is a terrible thing. What he has done has caused immense suffering. And he decides to become a Buddhist and use the rest of his life as an emperor to spread the teachings of the Buddha. Without Ashoka, Buddhism may not have gotten out of India. So he sends missionaries to Sri Lanka, and then into Southeast Asia, up into what is Afghanistan. Then they go along the Silk Road to China, to Korea, to Japan. And that's the essential spread of Buddhism, largely as a result of the efforts of this man. If you ever go to India, you'll see pillars all over the country that he built with Buddhist scriptures on them. So a very important figure. Okay, let's get to China. As I said, it reached China during the Han Dynasty via the Silk Road. There was I think a few years back, there was an exhibit at the Getty of the Silk Road. The Silk Road went from China all the way to Europe, to Vienna. And it was a major trade route. And whenever you get trading of goods, you also get the sharing of ideas, because ideas travel that way. So it came to China during the Han Dynasty. A number of accounts in Chinese literature have led to legends regarding how this actually happened. Now, these are legendary to some extent. But this Han Emperor Ming, 58 to 75 CE, was the one who is claimed to have brought Buddhist teachings to China, although they had probably come along the Silk Road. But the myth is important. He has a dream, according to the legend, of a god whose body has the brilliance of the sun. So he goes to his scholar, Fu Yi, and says, "Can you interpret this dream?" He's a Jungian. No. So Fu Yi told the emperor about someone in India called the Buddha, who had attained, who had attained the Tao. Remember from last week, the Tao is the path or the way? Who had attained the Tao and had the brilliance of the sun. The emperor then sent an envoy to India to get Buddhist scriptures, and they were returned on the backs of white horses. And that is the name of the first Buddhist temple in China, called the White Horse Temple, which you can visit today. It's been, of course, redone a number of times over the years, but the White Horse Temple. In addition to the text coming back, 2 monks came along to interpret, because the texts aren't in Chinese. The texts are in Sanskrit and Pali, and so they would have to be not only interpreted, they had to be translated. So a big process takes place. The first documented translation of a Buddhist scripture into Chinese occurred in 148 CE with the arrival of this monk by the name of An Shigang. He worked to establish Buddhist temples in Luoyang, and we'll go there later. That's where Luoyang is in terms of China. There's some very famous sculptures there, which we'll visit shortly. And organized the translation of numerous scriptures. Mahayana Buddhism, which is a little different form of Buddhism, it's called the greater vehicle. It's different because it allowed enlightenment not to be restricted just to monks. Early Buddhism believed that to gain enlightenment took real personal effort. It could not be done out in the world. It had to be done in monasteries with other groups of monks. That was the oldest Theravada tradition. As a result, it didn't appeal to a lot of people. If you're told that the only way you can gain enlightenment is to give up your family life and go into a monastery, a lot of people are going to say, maybe in my next life. So in any case, Mahayana, and this is really simplifying it, allowed for enlightenment for lay people. And that, as a result, it's called Maha, the great vehicle. Everyone can come in. So, and in terms of China, it was propagated by this gentleman by the name of Lotye Sen, who came from the Buddhist kingdom of Gandhara, which was in North Pakistan. So it's along the Silk Road. He translated numerous sutras. Remember the word sutra from before? Sutra means stitch, but it's like a chapter. It's a Buddhist chapter with topics such as samadhi, which is this point of sudden enlightenment where you recognize the self is not real, or the self you think is real is not real. And a number of other things and meditative practices. So he added to this tradition through translation of text. You got to remember, imagine bringing text in from a religion that is in a certain language. What are you going to, if I brought all these texts to you and handed them out tonight in Sanskrit, what would you do with them? Probably go sell them. You would need somehow to translate those. So this is a very long process. It took Chinese scholars learning Sanskrit to be able then to translate into Chinese. So when I say quickly, well, he translated that, it's a very long process. And most of these guys gave their lives up to that goal, translating the original Pali Sanskritic texts into Chinese. And of course, the problem is Chinese is ideograms. It's not letters. Yeah. So initially, Buddhism faced difficulties in terms of establishing itself in China. The concept of monasticism and what was seen as the aversion to social affairs seemed to contradict Confucian ideas. Confucianism was very much this worldly. You have certain hierarchical relationships. You don't try and leave this world in any sense. So it was fighting against that very strong tradition. Some even declared Buddhism was harmful. And we'll see. So there have been several periods in Chinese history where Buddhism was persecuted because it was felt to be harmful to society. Some even declared that Buddhism was harmful and that it destroyed the state because it put more emphasis on enlightenment than serving the state. But what saved it probably was its incorporation or association with certain Taoist ideas. Many of the underlying Buddhist ideas fit quite well into Taoism. And remember, Taoism itself was not, it was counterculture. It had always been wary of power and society and norms. So that's probably what allowed Buddhism to survive initially. And especially in the translations, Taoist terms were often used to try and explain Buddhist ideas because they would seem to be similar. Okay. Early on in Buddhist history, there are nuns, but primarily over as it spread, because remember, these are patriarchal societies, let's face it. I mean, they're not today. And so, yeah, most of this was related to men. Eventually, Buddhism gained some support in the imperial courts, and that always helps. Okay, when you have that. So the growth and influence of Buddhism encouraged further contacts with its homeland, as seen in the journey of this monk by the name of Fa-Xian. Very, very important individual in the development of Buddhism in China. He traveled from China to India. How did he get there? He walked over the Himalayas. So when you say you're going to India to get texts, you're not jumping in a plane or a bus or a train. He walked, and it took him quite a while to get there. And he visited Buddhist sites in Nepal, India, as far south as Sri Lanka. So he walked right across India as well. And he was all along acquiring more and more Buddhist scriptures. Because as Buddhism grows as a religion, it develops more and more scriptures. So he's collecting all these scriptures. And then he returns and spent the rest of his life translating and editing. So this is how scriptures kept coming into China. So another significant 4th century event was the arrival of this gentleman by the name of Camarillo. He was a monk who was captured during the Chinese conquest of a kingdom in northwest China. He was imprisoned for many years, and then he was released in 401 CE, and he attained a very high place in Chinese Buddhism and became known as the great master of the West. He revolutionized Chinese Buddhism with his translations. There had been translations, but there are good translations, and then there are average translations, and then there are bad translations. Well, his translations came to be known as really high-level translations. And they're praised for their flowing smoothness, clarity of meaning. So just because you translate doesn't mean you have a good translation. You can, a way to do this is get some text, let's say the Divine Comedy, and look at different translations. Translation is a real art. It's a real art. So in any case, and he was known for his translation of the Diamond and Amitabha Sutras, which became very, very important texts in Chinese Buddhism. And as a result, he really intellectualized Buddhism because his translations were so good, so deep, so meaningful that philosophers became interested in them. So he's a very significant person. Okay, due to this wide proliferation of text, a number of schools emerged. So there wasn't just one Buddhism. There were numerous schools of Buddhism. And there had been numerous schools of Buddhism in India, in wherever it went. Wherever you study Buddhism, you won't find just one Buddhism. Just like if someone came here, wanted to study Christianity. Well, they wanted to see all the versions. It'd take quite a long time. So the same thing happened. So I'm going to just talk about two of the most important in terms of China. One was called Pure Land Buddhism, and the other Chan. So let's look at these in some detail. Pure Land Buddhism were first developed in India and were very popular in Kashmir, in the north, and then later in Central Asia, and then came via the Silk Road into China. Pure Land Sutras were brought into China as early as 147 CE, 2nd century, by the previously mentioned Lokasema, and he began translating the first Buddhist sutras into Chinese. So about the 2nd century, we find Pure Land. So what was Pure Land? Pure Land honored the Bodhisattva by the name of Amitabha. A Bodhisattva in Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism is an individual who may have been historical, who gains enlightenment, but doesn't go to nirvana. Refuses nirvana because he wants to come back and help everyone. Mahayana. Until everyone is saved, I will not be saved. That's the notion. Now, these individuals became mythical. They were believed to exist in transcendent realms, but could be connected to via meditation, just like Catholic saints can be connected via prayer. And Amitabha was the great Bodhisattva of compassion. And so Pure Land is based on the idea of the Amitabha. In a past life, the tradition says, Amitabha was a king who renounced his kingdom and became a bodhisattva named Dhammakara. So he had all this power, but he gave it up. So it'd be like converting and becoming a priest or a monk or something. But he gave it up to become a bodhisattva. And under the guidance of the Buddha, this is the myth, this is the story, he was shown innumerable Buddha lands. Where are these Buddha lands? They're not here, they're in other levels of existence. So he was shown these. After meditating for 5 eons, the Indians like big numbers. He made a series of vows to save all sentient beings. What's a sentient being? That includes all humans and all animals. And he made a vow. That was his vow. Until all beings were saved, he would not give up his work. Now remember, he's in another realm. He isn't walking around. This is part of the narrative. And he would then teach them to reach a place called Sukyavati, which can be translated as the Pure Land. Pure Land is a type of heaven, if you will. It's on one of these different levels of existence. He would teach people how to attain the Pure Land. And what became very important in Pure Land Buddhism was the repetition of the name Amitabha. Amitabha, 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 over and over and over again. So when you meditate in Pure Land Buddhism, you're meditating on Amitabha. We find this in all traditions. In the Christian tradition, there's that there's the Jesus prayer, okay, which says, I don't remember the exact words, but Jesus saved me, da da da. And you repeat it over and over and over. This is very common in most religious traditions. Thus, this is from one of the Pure Land texts. If you wish to come and be born in my realm, that's the Pure Land, you must always call me to mind again and again. You must always keep this thought in mind without letting up, and thus you will succeed in coming to be born in my realm. Now, we know through cognitive psychology that if you take anything and concentrate on it with complete mindfulness over and over again, that will become part of your psychic life. So this isn't just airy-fairy. It's the idea when you concentrate on something with complete mindfulness, and that's your focus, that will become incorporated into your psyche. This is all mystics know this in all traditions. And that's why they have these sort of what they call disciplines or practices. You don't become a mystic just by saying, I'm going to be a mystic. Okay? You have to practice. And this is the Pure Land practice. Amitabha, Amitabha. And you have an image often of Amitabha in front of you. Go home tonight, take out an image of Jesus or the cross or whatever, sit in front of it for an hour and repeat Jesus' name. I guarantee you something will happen. You're not going to become but your mind will be affected. And if it's positive thoughts and your positive image of Jesus and his sacrifice, it will fill you. And that filling up is the Pure Land. It doesn't have to be up there. The Pure Land is in here, really. The Pure Land is in here. So there's all these descriptions of the Pure Land. Surpasses all other realms. It gives you respite from karmic transmigration. Karmic transmigration is the big enemy both in Hinduism and Buddhism. That's that circle that goes round and round and round and round that is never satisfying. You can eat as much ice cream as you want. You will always want one more. Okay? It's never fulfilled. So in the end, that becomes sort of something you want to get rid of. So in this realm, you don't have that. It's inhabited by gods, men, flowers, fruit. Reminds you of Islamic paradise, actually, the description. These descriptions of these states of pure joy are often quite similar. They're images that we think of that bring joy and peace. You can do the opposite, by the way. Go watch a murder mystery tonight before you go to bed. What is that going to do to your head? You'd be surprised. You quite likely will have a nightmare. Because it's what you put in here stays. Okay. So when you get, now this is interesting, when you finally get to the Pure Land, you have a choice. Pure Land is just a stopping lane. You can either go on to Nirvana, if you so wish, or you can become a bodhisattva. And you can choose to come back and help others. Which is held to be the highest? The Bodhisattva, which is interesting. The ultimate goal of enlightenment, if it's only self-centered, is still self. Okay? So that's what Mahayana really emphasizes. All must be centered. Not just one, not just me, not just the Buddhist monk sitting in his monastery trying to leave this world and gain nirvana. That was seen to be, ironically, or perhaps paradoxically, a self-centered act. That one has to be desirous of all being saved. So Pure Land teachings became prominent in China with the founding of this temple. This temple. Yeah. In 402 CE. So Pure Land was one of the dominant schools in Chinese Buddhism. And you see it requires some discipline, but it's not rigorous. I mean, it's not like you're spending your whole time in trying to, all you have to do is meditate on the Amitabha Buddha, keep him in the forefront of your mind at all times. And that will bring you what your desired goal. Okay. Interestingly enough, like all other schools of Chinese Buddhism, it spread to Korea and then eventually to Japan, where today it's known as Jodo Shu. You find Pure Land Buddhism in Japan. Very big school of Buddhism in Japan. Chan, on the other hand, developed in China from the 6th century CE. So it's a little older. Younger, sorry. Becoming dominant during the Tang and Song dynasties, which were from the 8th to the 13th century. The principal teachings of Chan were associated with those of what are known as encounter stories and something called a koan. K-O-A-N. Has anyone ever heard of a koan? You will in a moment. It was now what's interesting about Chan, it was a separate transmission outside of scriptural teachings. It didn't base its teachings on the traditional scriptures. They were there and they were sometimes referenced, but most religions, for example, if you ask most Christians, it's in the Bible. Okay? This was a tradition that was outside of that scriptural notion. Scriptures were there, but they were not prominent. Instead, Chan pointed to direct understanding through the mind to see the true nature of things. Your mind can see the true nature of things. You don't need scriptures. Scriptures are helpful, but you don't need them. They're not prominent. And from China, Chan went to Vietnam, east to Korea, then to Japan. And in Japan, it becomes known as Zen. Chan in Chinese is Zen in Japan. So Chan tradition ascribes its origin to something called the flower sermon. Again, this is a bit mythological, but in the flower sermon, the Buddha had gathered his disciples for what's called a Dharma talk. So Jesus would gather his disciples and preach to them. Buddha did the same with his disciples, because many of the Buddhist disciples, like the early Christian disciples, didn't get it. He kept having to explain over and over. So anyway, he was giving this Dharma talk, and the Buddha then became completely silent, wouldn't speak. And the monks sort of start looking around because they expect, we know the truth through words, right? You got to talk to us. Some thought he was tired, or some thought he was even ill. Then the Buddha held up a flower and twirled it. That's why it's called the flower sermon. No words. Several of his disciples thought he wanted them to interpret it and to explain it. What does this mean? One disciple, by the name of Mahakastya, broke into a smile and said nothing. The Buddha acknowledged him instantly, saying, the Dharma gate does not rest on words, doesn't rest on cognitive ideas, but is a special transmission outside the scriptures. It's the notion of being able to have sudden insight by seeing that flower. Being completely mindful of that flower, as if that flower is the only thing that exists. That can lead you to enlightenment better than all the words and all the scriptures and all the preachers that people go to hear. This is the essence of Zen. Immediate insight, because the power is within you. Yeah, you can get some help. But if you're depending on someone else to give you enlightenment, forget it. You don't even need words. All you need is an open mind and the ability to forget yourself. Just to see the beauty of that flower. It's a famous story, Zen story, about this guy who's being chased by a tiger. He gets to a cliff. There's nowhere to go, but there's a rope, so he hangs onto the rope. And then he looks up, and there's a rat chewing on the rope. And he recognizes that it's not long before that rope is going to break and give way. Now, most people would be in utter sheer panic, right? The monk looks over and sees this beautiful flower growing out of the crevice. And everything's okay. I'm not that important. That flower represents reality, represents the Buddha nature. We all die. We all die. But what goes on? That's the question. What goes on? And for Buddhism, it's something called the Buddha nature, which we all have within us. In fact, everything has it within it. And we tend to think that we're more important than we are in terms of the cosmos. That doesn't mean you're not important. But at certain times, you'll have that insight. I'm just part of something so much bigger than myself. I am part of this gigantic cosmos. And I'm part of it. It's that sudden insight that Zen offers. Anyway, so what's a koan? It's usually a question, sometimes a story, which Chan masters ask their students. It's often paradoxical or linguistically meaningless. For example, what is the sound of one hand clapping? So the student will be asked this. Go away and come back. And these students will go away and they'll try and think of something really clever, using ideas and cognition. And they'll come back and they're always wrong because there's no right answer. The question itself is meant to break down the idea of the only way of finding truth is through reason and words. You break through at a certain point. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Emptiness. So, and you can buy books full of these things. It's one is, where were you before you were born? Well, if you're trying to reason this out, it doesn't, there's no answer. The idea is to make you recognize that there are some things that have no rational answer. Where did the universe begin? Okay, the science of the Big Bang. No, the next question is what? What was before the Big Bang? Science will say there's nothing before the Big Bang. There's no time. Oh, what is time? So the rational mind always wants to come to, and Zen says, ultimately, your best insights about life aren't through reason. They're through mindful intuition, which means that deep within you have the ability, according to Zen, to see your connection. What we tend to do throughout life is block that connection. There are all sorts of other things that make us separate, make us better than others. You ever ask yourself, why do people need to win? Why do you have to win? Well, it's like, that makes me important. That shows how great I am. Well, the next question is, well, if you're so great, you wouldn't need it. You need to win shows that you're not great, because you need that. Someone that didn't, okay, anyway. So these are the ideas that Zen are telling you. You have these intuitive understandings within you. Now, do you see how this would relate somewhat to Taoism? That intuitive flow of things that you have within you. Okay. So, we find, what does that say? Is that Bodhidharma? Bodhidharma brings Chan to China. He's the monk who brings what becomes Zen in Japan to China. So he becomes Chan Buddhism's main teacher. He came from India and he taught these new ways of understanding reality free of scripture. Free of scripture. It's interesting, even in the West right now, in certain Christian circles, there are those that are pointing to the need to get beyond Scripture. Not abandon it, but get beyond it, because it's holding us back. We need new insights into the Christian tradition. This is where the Catholic Church might have something to say again. Because the Catholic Church always held that there was much more to Christianity than the Bible. Protestant Reformation really put that Bible. The Church says there was much more. There's a whole history of tradition. There are the mystics. So at a certain point, when your tradition becomes what is called cognitively dissident, you know what that means? When it doesn't match, you can only put up with so much, right? How many of you would still buy the idea that the Earth is flat, or that the Earth is the center of the galaxy? Okay, so, and at one time that was held to be so through Scripture. So in any case, okay, let's move on. This monk by the name of Wu-Zong, is that? Yeah, okay. He was another traveler who went to India. He visited over 100 kingdoms and wrote reports on all of them. When he returned, he brought with him another 657 Sanskrit texts, which of course will be translated. He also brought relics, statues, on 22 horses. 22 horses filled with all these things. With the emperor's support, he set up a large translation bureau in what is now Chang'an. Yeah, that's on that side. That's what Chang'an is in China. And spent the rest of his life translating these texts. I mean, that's dedication, right? That's dedication. He's credited with translating 1,330 sections of Scripture. Many of these deal with the nature of consciousness, which is, what's that? Oh, yeah. Very feeding and going good, yeah. He wasn't living a life of luxury, I can tell you that. In any case, and this is very important in Buddhism, always. What is the nature of consciousness? Which I find very interesting today is coming into scientific inquiry in a big way in neurology. Scientists are trying to come to terms with what is consciousness? Where does it come from? There are two basic schools of interpretation in the scientific community, as I understand. The major one is that the brain somehow creates consciousness. How? Not sure, but that's what it does. There is another model, however, and that is to see the brain more like a television set. Does a television set create the images that come through it? No. It is just a channel that allows that energy to flow through from the outside. So that is the model of consciousness that, for example, the Dalai Lama and Buddhist psychologists believe. Consciousness comes through us. We don't create it. It comes through us. Not just us, but through all of reality at one level. Everything is conscious at some level. Human beings will just be at a higher level of consciousness. But everything is conscious. And so this was dealt with in many ways. In Chinese Buddhism, in Indian Buddhism, the Dalai Lamas, you can get books on him talking about consciousness. Because depending on how you define consciousness, that leads to all sorts of implications. Is consciousness just created by the brain, or does consciousness come through the brain? Interesting question. So, let's see. This is a very important text that was also part of Chinese tradition, and it's spread. It's called the Heart Sutra. It says essentially that nothing is permanent. Everything is changing. Only the heart is solid. It has a very interesting quote in it. Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. It seems like what? Contradiction. What can that mean? How can form be empty? It's empty because it's not solid. Form is always changing. Have you ever noticed that? Form is always changing. Now, from second to second, you can't tell. But over time, look at anything, it changes. But to be able to do that, it has to be empty. If it wasn't empty, it could never change. It would always be solid. But about the reverse, emptiness is form. What can that possibly mean? Emptiness always creates new form. The other side of that. We're so geared to thinking of form as permanent, even though we know it isn't, because you just look around. But we tend to think in those ways. And there's some practicality to that in daily life. But when you really get down to examining it, nothing is permanent. Everything is changing. Emptiness is form. Form is emptiness. And this is the Heart Sutra. It's gate parasan gate bodhisattva. That's the mantra of the Heart Sutra. I have a recording of monks chanting this for about half an hour. Again, it's that same motion. What's the purpose? It's to keep you realizing that form is not permanent, and therefore not to become overly attached to form. If you're overly attached to form, you will definitely end up suffering. Even if you're the greatest athlete in the world, if you're attached to that notion, when you're 85, 90, you're going to suffer because all you're going to think about is how great I was. So, yeah, living in the past. Yeah. Okay, these are some, this is in a place called the Longmen Grotto near Yuan. I mentioned Yuan earlier. This is an example of some of the art, the Chinese artistic explosion of Buddhism. There's as many as 100,000 statues in 1,400 caves. Can you see all the caves? Ranging from a statue of 1 inch to 57 feet in height. You see the big one. This is a very, and how are these made? They're hand-carved out of the pit. That's the dedication of that term. And then there's this, so the Lehan giant Buddha, the Chanam, carved in the hillside in the 8th century. The largest stone Buddha in the world, 233 feet. Yes, yep. It takes effort and dedication. And they didn't sign their names. It's not about them. Yeah, if you've ever been down the Yangtze, you go up those waterways, and there are caves up there. Okay. So Buddhism in China was nearly wiped out by this gentleman, the Emperor Wu-Zong, who in 845 initiated what was known as the Great Anti-Buddhist Persecution. The emperor's reasons for persecuting were economic, social, and religious. Economic, because he had fought a big war and needed money, and the monasteries were quite wealthy. So he looted them. He also found Confucian intellectuals who said that Buddhism was anti-Chinese, it was taking away from the family structure, etc., etc. So there was a period of persecution, which ended during the next year. But from this point on, Buddhism starts to decline in terms of influence. Still be around, but when you persecute a religion for a certain period of time, it has its impact. It never completely recovered. It made some headway during the Ming Dynasty, and then later during the Yuan Dynasty, but then it ran into this gentleman. Where monasteries and temples were converted to secular use, priests and monks became state employees. The state-operated temples and monasteries tended to be in large cities, other places that foreign visitors could come to keep these sort of as museum pieces. And then, of course, in 1953, Chinese Buddhism was organized into the Buddhist Association of China. And there's the Christian Association of China. And there's the Taoist Association of China. These are all associations run by the state. And they're under the leadership of the Communist Party. Then, of course, during the Cultural Revolution, which began in 1966, Mao's Red Guards did incalculable damage to Buddhist temples and Buddhist temples, destroying thousands of pieces. After Mao's death, the government relaxed the opposition. However, Buddhism is still controlled by the government. As I said, the Buddhist Association of China still exists to keep Buddhism in the world. So you can practice Buddhism as long as you're not crossing over in political areas, anything that would be seen to threaten. Yeah, I want to conclude with some comments about Chinese-Tibetan connection. Because Tibet, for a long period of time, was part of China. So that's the connection. The history actually goes back to about 641 CE, the early time period. In that year, this king, Songtsen Gampo, unified Tibet with military conquest, and then took two Buddhist wives, one from Nepal, Princess Virakuti, and Princess Wencheng of China. They were both Buddhists and introduced their husband to Buddhism. And Sanghampo built the first Buddhist temple in Tibet and put Tibetan translators to work on Sanskrit scriptures. Now the Sanskrit had to be translated either from Chinese or Sanskrit into Tibetan, because Tibetan is its own language. During the reign of this king, Vishnu began in 755, Buddhism became the official religion of Tibet. So from the 8th century, it's been the official religion of Tibet. The king also invited famous Buddhist teachers, including this gentleman, Padmasambhava, an Indian master, who focused on combining meditation and visual practices. Tibetan Buddhism is known for its visualization. And to do that, it uses these, a mandala. It uses mandalas. What is a mandala? They're typically circles, sometimes in a square on the outside, with repeating symmetrical shapes, and they're considered a sacred symbol. They are believed to have originated in the 4th century BCE by Buddhist monks, and are found in any Buddhist culture throughout the world. You go to any country, you will find them. They represent the universe in an ideal form and highlight the transformation of suffering into joy. Outside of is suffering. If you look at any of what's going on in those outer circles, all sorts of violence and things, that's samsara. That's the outer circle. And that's what most of us live in day to day at one level or another. But at the center, there is a figure or symbol that represents the Buddha nature, which is grounded, free from the whirling and outer layers that surround it. That's the core. That's the ground, which none of this stuff on the outside can affect unless you let it. So the idea here is this represents your journey from that outer circle to that groundedness. There are many statues of the Buddha. If you ever see him, his hand is touching the ground. That symbolizes that he is grounded. We use that term, is that person grounded? If they're not grounded, they lose a lot. So this is the notion. And this is, you meditate on this. You meditate on the mandala. And this became a very, very important part of Buddhist Tibetan practice. You visualize, you take into your mind that image of the Buddha as a symbol of groundedness. You meditate on it. You visualize it. You make it real to the mind. You visualize it. And that's what the mandala is. Okay, let's move forward. He's also done this with the founding of this monastery. His name is the Samye Monastery, the first monastery in Tibet. in 836, King Fa-Xian, a supporter of Buddhism, died, and his half-brother, not a nice guy, became the new king of Tibet, who suppressed Buddhism. He wanted to go back to the old traditional religion of Tibet known as Bon, B-O-N, sort of an animistic religion, lots of demons, but those get incorporated into Tibetan Buddhism. You've never seen these demons figures in Tibetan Buddhism. They get incorporated. They're not good guys, but they're, I think they became the symbols of their inner being. If you have a visualization of something, it often helps you come to terms with it. If something doesn't have a form like that, it becomes sort of universal. So in any case, he persecuted it for some time. But as again, Tibetan Buddhism was strong enough to survive. And then in 1207, the Mongol armies invaded and occupied Tibet. And this Justice, known as Satyapandita, was invited to Mongolia by Genghis Khan, whose grandson became a Buddhist. We usually don't think of the Genghis Khan and the Mongols as Buddhists. They always have this violent image, right? So in any case, and then Tibet would be ruled by a series of Sakya Lamas until 1358. The Mongols introduced the term Lama. Okay, hold on to that. In the 14th century, the Gelug school, which is the Dalai Lama's school, was founded, and the head Lama of the school converted the Mongol leader, Altan Khan. It's commonly believed that Altan Khan originated the title Dalai Lama, which means ocean of wisdom, to give to the Gelug Lamas. So the Gelug was one school of Tibetan Buddhism, became popular with the Mongol emperor, leader. He supported this school and created the title Dalai Lama, meaning the ocean of wisdom. In religious terms, the Dalai Lama was and is believed by his devotees to be the incarnation of this Bodhisattva, Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha Bodhisattva of divine compassion. If you've ever heard the Dalai Lama speak, he focuses on two things: science and compassion. Someone asked him in one of the speeches about, how would you define yourself? He said, I'm a scientist. I'm a scientist. Buddhism claims to be scientific, and specifically scientific about the inner workings of the mind. Science in the West, until fairly recently, has always focused on the outside. Physics, how the natural world works. It's now started with neurobiology to move inside. Tibetan Buddhism has done this for centuries. In any case. And it's believed when he dies, his reincarnation becomes the next Dalai Lama. Although he has said there may not be another Dalai Lama. Why? Because the Chinese government has one lined up already. Because, and that, of course, was a result of, I'm just moving ahead, of the invasion. When the People's Republic invaded Tibet in 1950, claiming Tibet was originally part of China, just as they say Taiwan was originally part of China. The troops came in, and the Dalai Lama had to escape. Hidden, disguised, on horseback, down through the Himalayas into northern India, where he now resides in Dharamsala. So that's the connection. There's a long connection of Tibetan Buddhism with Chinese Buddhism, and today, what remains of Tibetan Buddhism in terms of its center is in northern India, in Dharamsala. For those of you who have met my friend Mary Curzon, the Buddhist monk who's one of the Dalai Lama's doctors, he lives in Dharamsala with the Dalai Lama, travels with him. Big question is, because the Dalai Lama is not that young, what happens when this Dalai Lama dies? And he has said he doesn't know. There may not be another Dalai Lama, but he always puts positive spins on things. That's the amazing thing about this man's mental health. When he's asked about the Chinese invasion, he doesn't feel sorry. He says, I feel compassion for those invaders because they will have to face the karmic consequences. So I have compassion for the suffering that they have brought upon themselves. And if there isn't another Dalai Lama, something else will appear. Something else will appear. The Buddha nature never dies, according to the Dalai Lama. Okay. That gets us through Buddhism. We'll take next week off because I think I'm still going to be patched up a bit. Following week, we'll look at Christianity in China. It has a long history. A lot of people aren't aware of it. Goes back to some of the early Nestorian monks. But that'll be enough for tonight.